The death of Henry VIII was not swift, noble, or peaceful. It was a long, festering descent into agony, decay, and isolation. Behind the grandeur of the Tudor throne, England's most notorious king suffered a decline as horrific as his reign was legendary. By the 1540s, Henry VIII's physical transformation was alarming. Once athletic and handsome, the king had become grotesquely obese, his waist measuring over 54 inches. Years of overindulgence and injury took their toll, reducing the powerful monarch to a man barely able to walk. A serious jousting accident in 1536 left Henry unconscious for 2 hours and permanently damaged his leg. The wound reopened repeatedly for the rest of his life, developing into ulcerous sores that refused to heal. Doctors applied burning treatments that only increased his agony. Henry's increasing weight worsened his leg problems. He required mechanical devices to hoist him onto his horse. Courtiers recoiled from the putrid smell of his infected leg, and no amount of perfume or herbs could mask the stench that surrounded the aging king. Mentally, Henry grew more paranoid and cruel. He executed close advisors and even 2 of his 6 wives. Historians link this psychological shift to chronic pain, untreated head injuries, and the isolation imposed by his deteriorating health. The king rarely appeared in public during his final years. His once mighty court was now ruled through letters and intermediaries. Henry, unable to climb stairs or mount horses, ruled from a throne that had become his prison, both physically and politically. By 1546, Henry VIII was a shadow of his former self, rotting from within, bitter, and monstrous in appearance. England feared him, pitied him, and braced itself for the inevitable end of the larger-than-life king who could no longer escape his own body. Henry VIII's outward decay was only part of the horror. Inside, his body was betraying him in excruciating, humiliating ways. Historians and medical experts have long debated the exact causes, but evidence suggests that multiple chronic diseases destroyed him from the inside out. One major suspect is type 2 diabetes, likely brought on by obesity and his excessive diet. Henry consumed vast amounts of meat, sweets, and wine daily. His blood sugar levels were probably dangerously high, leading to fatigue, skin infections, and slow healing of his ulcers. Another possibility is syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease rampant in Tudor England. Some contemporaries whispered that Henry had it, pointing to neurological symptoms, infertility, and sudden bursts of rage. However, no records of mercury treatment, common for syphilis, have been found in his medical history. Henry's infamous leg ulcers worsened each year. The open sores would often seep with pus and blood, sometimes leading to fever and delirium. Amputation was considered, but doctors feared he wouldn't survive it. Instead, they drained the wounds using hot irons and herbal poultices. The king's kidneys may also have been failing. His urine was described as thick and foul-smelling. Combined with chronic constipation and bloating, it's possible Henry suffered from renal and liver issues. His body, already massive, became a toxic vessel slowly poisoning itself. These internal failures affected his mind. Henry became prone to memory lapses, erratic decisions, and paranoia. The line between his physical and mental decline was blurred. He turned on friends, accused loyal advisors of treason, and trusted almost no one in his final years. By the end, Henry's body had become a battlefield of festering flesh, organ failure, and untreated infections. His once mighty form, once admired across Europe, was a living tomb. Each breath he took was drawn through layers of rot, suffering, and unrelenting internal torment. As Henry VIII's physical health declined, so too did his mind. Once charismatic and sharp-witted, he became known for explosive temper, unpredictable mood swings, and cruel decisions. The king's mind was rotting alongside his flesh, and England suffered the consequences. His paranoia grew to terrifying extremes. He believed conspiracies surrounded him, even accusing loyal servants of plotting against him. Close aides were arrested, tortured, or executed without trial. Fear of betrayal haunted Henry's every moment, even inside his guarded palace walls. Henry's violent outbursts terrified his court. He would scream at advisors, throw objects, and fall into rages so intense that no one dared speak. Diplomats recorded these episodes with horror, noting how the once great monarch had turned into a dangerous, unpredictable tyrant. His relationships deteriorated. The king lashed out at those closest to him, including his wives. Catherine Howard was executed for alleged adultery, and his marriage to Catherine Parr nearly ended in bloodshed. Henry's love turned cold and suspicious, poisoning any chance of peace. Mental illness was poorly understood in the 16th century. Doctors dismissed his behavior as royal prerogative or divine wrath. In reality, years of head trauma, chronic pain, and isolation may have triggered severe depression or even a form of dementia. By the final years, Henry rarely emerged from his chambers. He relied on spies, letters, and secret interviews to control his realm. The once magnificent royal court had become a ghostly echo, filled with silence, shadows, and fear of the king's next outburst. He spent many days alone, staring into space or weeping without cause. Surrounded by gold, power, and servants, Henry VIII had never been more isolated. Even his children were kept away. The great king, feared by Europe, was now feared by his own soul. In the winter of 1546, Henry VIII's suffering reached its peak. The king, now swollen, crippled, and barely conscious, was consumed by disease and agony. Behind the guarded doors of Whitehall Palace, England's monarch endured a death not fit for any man, let alone a king. His leg ulcers festered uncontrollably. The wounds dripped constantly with pus and blood, soaked through linen, and filled the room with a sickening stench. His physicians tried cauterization, but the infection had burrowed too deep. No remedy could tame the rot devouring him. Henry was bedridden and too large to move without assistance. He required a custom-made mechanical hoist to lift him. Even then, every movement caused searing pain. Servants risked punishment simply by assisting him in and out of bed or changing his linens. Food became his only comfort, though swallowing was painful. He continued demanding feasts, though he could barely chew. Half-rotted teeth and swollen gums made each bite agonizing. Meals became symbolic, a desperate grasp at the power slipping from his hands. He could no longer sleep through the night. The king moaned and cried in his bed, plagued by fever and hallucinations. Some claimed he talked to ghosts. Others whispered that he screamed the names of wives and courtiers he'd executed in his reign. Priests feared approaching him. His breath was labored, his body twitching. But he refused last rites until the very end, terrified, perhaps, of the sins he'd committed. When they finally prayed over him, his eyes were glassy, and his lips barely moved. Every breath was drawn through pain. His body, once regal and powerful, had become monstrous and bloated. By January 1547, Henry VIII was little more than a dying corpse on a blood-soaked bed, gasping, sweating, and choking beneath the crushing weight of his own ruin. The death of Henry VIII was as grim as his reign was ruthless. After years of decay and torment, England's most powerful monarch died on January 28, 1547. His final moments were marked by silence, dread, and the heavy air of unfinished legacies. In his last hours, Henry drifted in and out of consciousness. He was too weak to speak clearly and barely responded to those around him. His physicians stood helpless. There was no medicine, no ritual, and no prayer strong enough to halt the inevitable. A few loyal servants stood by his side, afraid to announce his death too soon. In Tudor law, proclaiming the monarch's death before the successor's location was secure could be considered treason. So, they waited, pretending the king still lived. Edward Seymour, his brother-in-law, moved quickly to secure the line of succession for Henry's son, Edward VI. Behind closed doors, plans were already being executed as Henry lay dying, power shifting even before his body turned cold. When death finally came, it was not marked by trumpet or prayer. His bloated body released a final groan, then collapsed into stillness. The most feared king in English history died not in majesty, but in pain, confusion, and abandonment. The official announcement was delayed for days. Court life continued as if the king were still alive. Behind locked doors, his body lay hidden, and the court plotted how to present his death without revealing the horrific reality of his final state. Henry VIII, conqueror of wives and churches, architect of executions and power, had met the fate of all men, but more grotesquely than most. His end was a fitting conclusion to a life consumed by ambition, cruelty, and bodily decay. Henry VIII's death was only the beginning of the horror. His bloated, rotting corpse became a spectacle of decay. While the court tried to mask the truth with ceremony, nature refused to be silenced. The king's body would not go quietly into the grave. After his death, Henry's corpse was sealed in a heavy lead-lined coffin. Due to his immense size and condition, decomposition began rapidly. The stench became unbearable, even with perfumes and herbs. Guards gagged while standing watch beside the closed casket. The journey to Windsor for burial was long and poorly planned. During the procession, the coffin rested overnight at Sion Abbey. By morning, it had burst. Black fluid leaked through the casket seams, dripping onto the stone floor, an event many saw as divine justice. Eyewitnesses reported dogs licking the leaking bodily fluids. Whether legend or truth, this disturbing image haunted England's memory of its once mighty king. The symbolism was undeniable. Even in death, Henry was devoured by the consequences of his own excess. His funeral was massive and theatrical. Trumpets, draped banners, and choirs tried to cover the grotesque reality of the body inside. Nobles wept, but many knew they were mourning more for appearances than love. The tyrant was gone, and fear had died with him. Henry was buried in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle beside Jane Seymour, his third wife. No grand tomb was ever built. Despite his power, his grave was modest. Time, it seemed, buried him not in splendor, but in shame and silence. In the end, the mighty monarch who reshaped England with blood, fire, and iron was reduced to a leaking coffin and a forgotten grave. His legacy lived on, but his corpse rotted like any man's. Death made no exceptions for kings. Thanks for watching The Forgotten Past. If you enjoyed the journey, like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a hidden story or untold truth. New discoveries await. See you in the next video.